Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UBC Career Centre and UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Today, you may be joining us from many places with many different histories, and you can learn more on the traditional owners of those lands at native-land.ca. You should be able to see a QR code on your screen and a link in the chat shortly. Please take a moment to either follow the link or scan the code and check in and let us know you're attending today's event. My name is Amir, and I'm an Employer and Alumni Engagement Advisor at the UBC Career Centre, and I'll be your moderator today. Whilst in our event space, I would like to remind everyone that all members of the UBC community are expected to uphold a respectful environment in which civility, diversity, opportunity, inclusion are valued. At the UBC Career Centre, you will find our Work Learn program, our career development coaches, virtual workshops, and online resources, as well as the employer and alumni team who create opportunities to engage with employers and professionals through career fairs, employer info sessions, and our careers online job board. You can visit us in person at Brock Hall or through your account on Careers Online to learn more about our services. I would also like to mention that UBC students have access to LinkedIn Learning for free. You can scan the QR code that's on screen and follow the links and find courses to support your learning journey. All participants are muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to turn on your camera as it's nice to see some faces as we go through the event. We will have a Q&A opportunity in the second half of today's office hour. Some of you have already sent us your questions in advance, and I'll make sure to get to those questions once we get to the Q&A. But I encourage you to send in your questions live or raise your hand and ask your question from Hatim as we go through the event. So again, you can send your questions in the chat or raise your hand and jump on camera to ask your question. We'll prompt you for that when we get to the second half on our Q&A. Okay, I am now happy to introduce today's speaker. Hatim's journey at UBC started in 2012 after he received the International Leader of Tomorrow Award to attend the Faculty of Science. He moved to Vancouver from Abu Dhabi and 4 years later graduated from UBC in 2016 with a major in microbiology and immunology and a minor in commerce. He had initially planned on attending medical school and didn't really know what he wanted to be when he grew up. And he came from a family of medical professionals, so it seemed like it made sense. 2 years into his degree, Hatim decided he didn't want to be a doctor, and the hunt for a new plan began. After attending a talk at UBC about adjacent possibilities, some of that anxiety faded away. Hatim graduated, found his first job, and followed his intuition from step to step on his journey to a fulfilling career. The truth is, he still doesn't have an idea of what he will be when he grows up, but he's developed a set of principles that help him find the best next step in his journey. And in this talk, Hatim hopes to share those principles with you and give you some assurance that it's not always the full plan that we need to determine, but the most appropriate next step. Okay, I'm now going to give the floor to Hatim. Thank you very much for being here for the office hour.
Awesome. Thank you, Amir. And thank you to the UBC Alumni Center for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Hatim. As Amir mentioned, I'm going to share my screen as I talk. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all a little bit about my journey. And then I want to spend as much time as possible answering questions. I got a little sneak peek, so I know that there's a bunch of questions that have come in. Just give me a thumbs up, Amir, that you can see my screen.
All good.
Awesome. Cool. So as I said, my name is Hatim Hanafi. My career in general has been in strategy and operations since I graduated from UBC. I currently work in tech at Microsoft, and that's where that touch of data science comes in. The touch has become like a whole full hand because I'm currently a data scientist in my current role. So part of my career and my journey has been figuring out how to marry that interest in strategy that I had very early on in my career with some more technical foundational skills. And in my case, that was data science. I'll talk through the journey in a little bit. Wanted to give a little bit of a sense of things outside of work as well. That's not a typo. I put singing and music twice because that is almost everything that I do outside of working. In addition to my career, I've spent the last few years recording and performing around Vancouver as a musician and as a singer and a songwriter. And it's like kind of a hobby / passion project / I don't call it a side hustle, but it's something that takes a lot of time as well, and something that kind of helps fulfill another part of me. Defining characteristics, I think any of my friends would say that this kind of summarizes me. I'm a middle child, so it means I need a lot of attention all the time. So this is perfect. Just a bunch of faces staring at me is exactly what I want. I'm in Aries, which means I'm stubborn and hard-headed, and I'm tall, and I am very, very loud and extroverted. But today I'm trying to give like the more professional version of that. So I'm going to try to chill out. But overall, I wanted to talk a little bit, me and Amir had a conversation when he first reached out about different things we could talk about. And I felt like putting myself in my shoes years ago when I was still a student at UBC. I remember when I decided that I wasn't going to do med school, having this like immediate overwhelming sense of dread of like, what am I going to do? Because I'd spent so many years with a plan in mind, and I felt so comfortable in that plan. And then all of a sudden I went from like a complete plan to zero. And I, as Amir mentioned, I like attended a talk at UBC. It was actually for the Student Leadership Conference. And the keynote speaker was this woman named Shaifali Puri, who was at the time the executive director for the Nike Foundation. And she talked about her journey in her career and all the pivot points in her career where she made certain decisions. And her career was much longer than mine and much more varied. It was like there was journalism, there was law, there was nonprofit, there was corporate, there was investment, there was like all of these different things. And she talked about like how every point felt like the right point at that time. And this concept of like just examining the adjacent possibilities at every point for the next step and following your gut and making that decision. So my hope today is to kind of give a really quick version of like my story and the different points where I've applied that principle, and then kind of take as much time as possible answering questions. So the beginnings, I was going to do a pop quiz, but I forgot that I gave Amir a bunch of information, and it was going to be in my bio. It's going to be like, does anyone know what the picture on the left is? But that's Sheikh Zayed Mosque in Abu Dhabi. So I grew up in Abu Dhabi, born and raised there. And when I was finishing high school, I knew that I wanted to study abroad. I knew that I wanted different experiences. I knew that I wanted to like branch out. That's the Aries in me. It was very like, I'm stubborn. I want to have my own path, and I want to do this. And the reality was, as an international student, it wasn't financially feasible for me to study anywhere that I wanted. So I had to really think through those adjacent possibilities. And I applied specifically to universities where I knew that I could potentially get some form of, financial help. And so I applied to like 8 or 9 universities, and was lucky enough to get accepted to many of them. But there was only 3 that seemed extremely financially reasonable, and a few others where it would be difficult, or I would put my family through hardship. I'd put myself in debt. And so as an international student, that was my first kind of, before I even knew what it was, my first decision, which I had to make by myself. And I chose UBC. So I ended up coming to UBC, and the picture on the right is a picture of a doctor, because I thought I was going to do med school, and I thought that was going to be my journey. The middle, I call it the middle because obviously it's not the end, I hope. But this is essentially the journey in a slide. So I did my degree in microbiology and immunology. That was with the very intent goal of going to med school and having like a very specific path drawn out for that. And even then there was like a little bit of anxiety because I didn't really know if I was going to get into med school. I wasn't Canadian, I was an international student. How would that work? But I kind of went down that path for a couple of years. The MCAT was a turning point for me in many ways. So I actually did my MCAT. And I remember that I signed up for it, and I signed up to do it on, it was like September 3rd or 4th. So it was like right before school was starting. I took the summer, went back home, wasn't working, wasn't studying, and devoted like a whole summer to studying for the MCAT. And for 3 months, I couldn't sit down and study. Like I just couldn't do it. And if I knew anything in life, I knew how to study at that point. So it was really stressing me out. I flew back to Vancouver a month before, tried to study, and the only time I was able to really sit down and study was the last 10 days. I would just sit down, I'd be like staring at the books, and I couldn't get through a page, and I didn't understand why that was happening, which is obviously not easy, especially for me at that time and at that age, to feel like I'm going to essentially fail this like landmark exam that determines my future. Studied the last 10 days, went in to the MCAT, did it. And while I was doing it, it didn't feel as bad as I thought it would feel. So I felt like I did okay. But I literally had like a movie moment that I'll never forget. I walked out of the building where I did my exam and opened the door, and like the sun was shining, and immediately I felt this like light bulb moment, which is why I put a light bulb in there, of being like, I don't really want to do this. Like, I thought I wanted to do this, but I don't really want to do this. And the reason that I couldn't do the things that I naturally could do all my life, which is like study really hard for something that important, is because it's not something that I want. Something that I was doing to please other people, to fulfill other people's hopes and dreams of me, who meant very well, obviously, but it wasn't my path. And so that was a huge turning point for me. And that's when that kind of like that first bout of huge anxiety came in, because I had no clue what I was going to do. I was halfway into a degree. I was also at UBC on a major scholarship. So it wasn't like I was like I could just change majors every week. Like if I was going to change my major, if I was going to change my direction, I had to build a case for it. I had to prove that this is actually what I wanted to do. I had to have conversations with my advisors and potentially like prolong my studies. And so decision one for me was like, do I want to do that, or do I want to continue down this path? And at the time, I felt like I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. The only thing I knew was what I didn't want to do. And so making a decision to change degrees without any certainty felt like it wasn't going to be worth that effort. Number two was, what I did know was what I was going to want to do wasn't going to be extremely technical. It wasn't going to be something that I necessarily needed a degree in the field for. I didn't want to be an engineer. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a pharmacist. It wasn't something that I needed my university degree technically to do. So I finished the degree, and I went to a UBC Consulting Club event because my best friend's girlfriend was the president. And so we just went to support her. And I walked in and she gave this presentation about what it was. And by the end of it, I remember feeling like, I think this is something that I could do. Like I really love solving big problems. I really love thinking about things from a big picture perspective. I didn't know this at the time, but what I was describing was a career in strategy, that I wanted to like help solve big problems. I wanted to break them down. I wanted to help people figure out where they needed to go. And so that kind of was the first decision point where I felt like I'd started to like narrow down the scope of the path. I knew I wanted to start in consulting, applied to a bunch of consulting companies. And when I graduated, I joined Deloitte. I was really lucky because I applied to around 10 or 11 consulting companies. Deloitte was my only interview because I spent the first 2-3 years of my career, of my university time, aiming for med school. And so all my stuff was in that direction. And I was competing against folks who knew what they wanted to do for 4 years. But the one smart decision that I made was that I applied for the healthcare consulting practice at Deloitte because I felt like my degree would help me there. It did. I got the job. I started working there, and I was working on healthcare strategy projects for, I would say like 4, 5, 6 months or something. And then I started to see all of these different adjacent possibilities of projects that I wanted to work on and people that I wanted to work on at the firm, work with at the firm, and like different areas that I wanted to learn about. And so I used that time as kind of like an exploration moment where I did a bunch of different projects. I worked in real estate projects, oil and gas projects, healthcare projects, all these different types of things, learning about user-centered design, learning about strategy, learning about operating models, and building a network within the company. One of those decisions to kind of branch out was doing a project with a small client based here in Vancouver. At the time, it's a company called Hootsuite. It's a tech company that was started in Vancouver, and Deloitte was starting this branch of our consulting business where we were targeting smaller companies. So the projects were smaller, they were shorter, you had more limited resources, but it was fun and exciting. And so I thought that I would love to do that. Put my hand up, did a bunch of grunt work for free on the side for the people who ran those projects. And then that project came about, and I did it. It was an 8-week project. And then by the end, Hootsuite I started having conversations about me joining them. And so Hootsuite had reached out to me because they had a role that was in strategy and operations aligned to a sales team there. That was a point where, honestly, I was already looking at jobs and I was interviewing at a bunch of different places for a bunch of reasons. But something told me from the beginning that this would likely be the job if I was going for it. And there was a bunch of different options for me at the time. I could stay at Deloitte, continue to get promoted, work towards partner track. I could go to Hootsuite, who were pursuing me, or I could continue to interview with all these other companies. And for me, Hootsuite made sense for a couple of reasons. At that point, I'd had 2.5 years experience working in strategy, working in consulting, but I felt like one, I could really do the job well. It was in my wheelhouse. It was literally doing what I was doing for different clients, but internally. 2, I'd never worked that much in tech. The project I did with Hootsuite was the only project that I'd done there. I'd never worked with a sales team directly. I'd never worked in-house at a company and like really followed through with my work for long periods of time. And I felt like that was going to be a challenge. I felt like it was going to stretch me. I felt like it was going to teach me new things. And so I had that confidence from the part that I knew that I could do. There's the excitement from the part that I had no clue how to do. And I felt like that there was just like a part of it that was gut. I felt like the team was great. I felt like the environment was going to be good for me. So I made the leap. And we called it in consulting at the time, going into industry. And I learned a lot in that role. That role taught me about being a self-starter. You know, when you're in consulting, a lot of the times someone has drawn out a project when they were pitching it, when they were proposing it. There's a very specific target. A client is paying a lot of money to your company. You're responsible to deliver on the things that you promised them that you were going to deliver. When you're working in-house, and especially at a smaller tech company, no one has the time to sit down and tell you, these are the exact 10 things that you need to do this week or this month. And so I was looking around at the people around me and I was like, these people are all finding their own work. They're finding their projects. They're seeing problems. They're seeing opportunities and they're just going for them. And their managers are supporting them as they do that, but they're just going for it. And that was such a new muscle for me. Even though at the time, like I was looking at people who were much more junior than I was and thinking, that's incredible. Like you just came up with it, you did it, and now you're reporting on how successful it is. And it was like top to bottom your idea. And so that's when I started to discover that kind of side of things and being, even though this is an overused word, but being entrepreneurial within a company and building your own path. And so after a year, I saw another kind of adjacent possibility there where there was a corporate strategy team, which was doing the work that was literally all that I wanted to do for my career. It was across the company, looking at all of our biggest problems, looking at all of our biggest projects, and trying to drive all of the departments forward along the same path. So I did the same thing again, started doing work on the side for them, doing extra things, taking on little mini projects on the side. And then I got offered a role full-time in that team, worked on that team for a year as a program manager. So that meant that I was helping to define the strategy and plan for the year for the company overall, aligning that to financial models and projections and stuff. And then throughout the year, executing on those strategic priorities. And so that meant I was leading teams from across the company, from different departments, and trying to bring everyone together and move them forward in one direction. Did that for a while. And then I always say that Microsoft slid into my LinkedIn DMs, which they did. And my current boss messaged me and said, it was a really long, very personalized, thought out message that said, I see your experience in strategy. I'm summarizing it. I see your experience in strategy. I run a data and strategy team. All my people are data scientists. I need someone with a strategy background who can also like kind of figure out numbers. And that was a really tough one for me because I was building a career in something that I knew that I did well and I knew that I enjoyed. And as much as Microsoft is an incredible company, I didn't know that I wanted to, one, go back to like a really large company again after I'd left that experience. I felt like I wasn't going to be good at it because I knew that they were going to expect me to become a data scientist immediately. And I didn't understand the environment. I was going to be in a much more technical environment, directly aligned with people who were doing software development, product managers. And I honestly, at the time, felt a little bit of an imposter syndrome of like, I don't have the technical skill set that these people have. I'm the person who comes in and says, like, if you do this work and this other person does this work and we align it this way, then we can launch this at this time. And that makes sense because there's a customer over here who wants that. And now I'm going to be sitting in lines of code trying to like figure out how things are doing. So at the time, there was, again, a bunch of possibilities. I could have stayed at Hootsuite, continued to go down that strategy route. There's a bunch of other companies that I was also interviewing with. There was an option for me to go back into consulting, which I was very much considering. And then there was this Microsoft offer. And again, I kind of looked at that decision in a similar way. I evaluated all the options, but with Microsoft, I felt like they were looking for someone with a strategy background. Again, that's the thing that I know that I can do. There's this big data component to this job that I absolutely fundamentally can't do in the way that they do it. Like, I can work myself around an Excel at the time, but I couldn't work myself around a SQL code at the time. So there's this part that I knew that like I felt was a stretch. And I looked at all the options and I was like, okay, this is the one that makes the most sense. At the time, I wasn't feeling stretched in my current job. Going back to consulting felt, again, like I was going back to something that I was super comfortable and super familiar with, but where was the tension? Where was the growth? And I felt like I wasn't late enough in my career to like really focus in on one thing and drive it. And the last part of it was I felt like the skill set that I would develop technically was going to help move me forward much more than staying in the same spot. The reason that I started that one and not the other ones, because that was the hardest decision, to move into a team that does something that I fundamentally don't do. So that's where I am now. I handle all of our strategy and planning stuff for the team. So, if we look at a year overall, what do we want to achieve by the end of the year? How do we want to measure it? How do we monitor against that? How do we determine ownership for who does what? But at the same time, I am fully doing product analytics for one of our products. So I am like working with the engineers to figure out how to put data in the back end. I'm analyzing the data on a regular basis. I'm reporting out to our leadership team. And so I'm living fully in those two halves of the job. So it kind of worked out, I think. I mean, I haven't been fired yet and I haven't quit. So I think it's working out. And then the bottom picture is a picture actually from my last show. I wanted to like also keep in mind that like career is important, but there's other parts of that. And it starts under the D for Deloitte, because that's when I really started having time to do it. I was working for Deloitte. It was a lot of work for sure, especially in the beginning, but I was out of school. I came from school. I came from a microbiology degree where I was doing classes and labs and then going into the lab in the evening and coming in on the weekend because your culture needed 24 hours. And that's when you cultured it. And like all of your life kind of revolved around school. And I suddenly had like these things called evenings and weekends. And so I started making music. And for me, I think that the fact that I pursued that has really helped with my career. One, it's like I share very openly with people I work with, my music and what I'm doing. And I think it humanizes you to an extent to have that outside of work. But it uses a different part of my brain, a very non-analytical part of my brain. It keeps me connected to myself, to my feelings, to my creativity, and helps me feel like I'm building a fuller, rounder life. And so when I am working, I'm like very much focused on that. And I have things outside of that kind of give me some repose. So I just wanted to like summarize really quickly some of the principles that I think came out for me when I was reflecting and putting in pictures from Google Images into these slides. The first is what I call my job trifecta. And this is, I think you probably heard me kind of say this as I was making decisions for different jobs. I always think about it this way, is like, does it have a part of it that I know that I can do well, that gives me certainty? Like when I'm super stressed, or when they give me a big task, is there something about this job and the skills that it requires that makes me feel like I'm probably gonna get there? I don't know how, but I'm gonna figure it out. 2, does it give me a chance to stretch? So is there something new that I'm going to learn in this job, or is it just going to be month after month of applying the exact same skills that I already have again and again? And at every point there was a chance to stretch. Like I had no idea what working was even like when I joined Deloitte. So everything was a stretch. With Hootsuite, working in sales, working in tech, working in-house, and with Microsoft, working in a super technical environment and being a technical person myself and learning a coding language from scratch as someone who was senior in the organization and had a lot of expectations on me, right? Like the quality there's no chance for quality to be diminished because I'm learning something new. And then what excites me, right? Like there are things that all of us do well that might not be exciting. And there's a lot of points in my career where I find myself doing those things, where I was being asked to do things that I could do, but I felt weren't keeping me excited about my job. And there's a lot of debate about like loving your job and being excited about it and all of that. And for me, I obviously have a part of my life that's not just my corporate career. I have music, we all have, community and friends and family and stuff. But so my job doesn't have to be the end all be all of happiness, but there has to be something about it that is exciting for me. And for me, that's that kind of big picture, strategic thinking, being able to solve big problems with people. And for me, people fall into that what excites me bucket. Every time that I've taken a job, it's been because I've really connected with the hiring manager, or I've known the people who are working there, or I got a chance to connect with them beforehand. After that, and this is where we get into the adjacent possibilities, check in regularly. And that looks different for different people. Like for me, I'm always reflecting and stuff, but there are certain times when I'll sit down and really think about where I am professionally and otherwise, but I'll talk about professionally here and think like, am I happy with my job? What parts of it are exciting me? What parts of it like stress me out or take energy away from me? Am I at a point where I need a change, or am I still happy here? Are there things that I just need to talk about with my boss? Do I need a new job? Like all of those things. Do I need another role within this company? Do I need to change companies? So those, like having those chances to check in. I have friends who literally schedule it in their calendar. For me, it's more like easygoing. Like if I feel like I'm frustrated, then I'll sit down and like think about it. And when that happens, I think examine all adjacent possibilities. And that's literally just one step, like the immediate next step. And so for me, if I check in and something's going wrong, it's like, is the immediate next step to talk about it with my boss? Is the immediate next step to talk about it with a mentor? Is the immediate next step to start applying for jobs and like interviewing? And I've done it before. And even if someone from Microsoft's on this call, like I've done it where I interview to understand, like, do I want to leave? Do I want to stay? Is this an adjacent possibility that's interesting to me? And then staying is also a possibility. It's not a given, right? I think the reason I caps locked all is that when I talk about this with other people, sometimes there's this idea that the possibilities are all about change, but staying stagnant is an equal possibility, and you have to choose to do that. So if like tomorrow I'm choosing to come back to work, and that's a choice, because today I looked at my possibilities and I was like, I would like my next paycheck, so I'm going to go do that and show up to work tomorrow. But all of them are possibilities. And then for me, when I look at those possibilities, there's research, there's data. I talk to mentors, I talk to my parents, I talk to my family, I talk to people, I look at the job, I look at how the company is doing, all of that. But at the end of the day, for me personally, there is that super cliche follow your gut thing. And I think for me, it's not like some ethereal message that like floats from the air and enters my brain. I believe that like subconsciously our minds and our bodies and our whatever know what is going to be best for us, because we've lived as us, right? Like I've lived as me for so many years. And so there's all of this experience of what I've liked and what I haven't liked. And so at the end of the day, I make the decision based on my gut. The last one, and this is just like a personal thing of mine, put yourself first and understand that like career is part of a broader life picture. I've put a lot of energy and a lot of time and a lot of work into my career, back from when I was, in high school trying to get a scholarship, to UBC, to changing and pivoting careers, to learning a whole new coding language in the last 2 years. But along the path, things have happened, major life events have happened to me, great things and not so great things. And a career is a part of our lives. And I think early on in my career, it was everything. It had to be perfect all the time. I had to be perfect all the time. And then real life happened and taught me that it's one part of the pie. And the times when I felt most able to do well are the times when the rest of my life has also been somewhat balanced. And that means different things for different people. It can mean relationships. For me, it also means music. It can mean my physical health, my mental health. All of those things matter, not just to serve your career, but just in general, because a career is just a tool in my mind for us to have like fulfilling, meaningful lives. I'm going to pause. I know this was a lot of talking about me, so I would like to kind of get questions from the group. I'll stop sharing my screen in a second, but hopefully there was something useful in that. And if there wasn't, ask me questions where I can give you something useful.
Thank you so much, Hatim. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot about you, but it's your office hour, so we're here to hear your career story. So I appreciate it. There were a couple of things coming in the chat as you were going through this, but before we do that, I just want to put this call out. So we're going into our Q&A. Please, if you want, turn on your cameras, and then raise your hand, ask your questions live. I have questions, but I think I want to hear from you all here who are in the room. So raise your hand or send your question in the chat. I'll prioritize those before going into the questions that were sent in advance. I think, and Adam, I see your hand. I'll get to you in 1 second. I'm just looking at the comments in the chat. So I think Yusra said it's nice to hear there's evenings and weekends while at Deloitte. I think tongue in cheek, you often hear about work-life balance in consulting firms. So I guess that's good to hear that you had that balance compared to your time at school, sort of, maybe.
Yeah, I think I know it wasn't a question, but I will like touch on it a little bit. There was a lot of work, and it definitely wasn't like all the time that I had extra time. But I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I got very early on in my career there from someone who's a little bit more senior than me was, he said Deloitte, but it's really any organization will take all the time you give it. And so I think for me, I took from that into all of my roles, that there's an ownership on our side as well, on my side, to decide how much I want to give. And there isn't really a rule. Like there's times when I feel really invested and I'm giving way more than I should. And there's times when I have other things to take care of and I've given less. And it's just really about communicating with your team and things like that. So obviously I've had some roles that have been really intense in my career, but that's something that I've taken with me, is that there's also a part of that ownership that's with us to kind of define how much we want to give at different points in time.
And I guess that's where the check-in thing comes in, right? Where you can go back and check in with yourself. Okay, yeah. Perfect. I see lots of hands being raised, lots of questions. So I'm just going to jump into it. Adam, you were the first one to raise your hand, so please unmute and ask the question.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Yep. Bear with me in the dress shirt. I don't normally dress like that. I have like a professional like headshot thing with LinkedIn in like 30 minutes. So thank you for sharing your story. I really, really relate to it. And yeah, it makes me feel like I'm not the only one who's completely switching their career. I've kind of like done engineering and now trying to get into product. And so my question is, for someone who is trying to get their foot in the door with say product management and strategy, I'm curious to hear your feedback on like small company versus big company. So I've heard a lot of people say, if you can work at a startup, that's your best option because you get exposed to all the different hats and you get the different experiences. Whereas, the other counter argument is you go to the big company and you have great mentorship and you have people you can lean on. There's more people out there that can support you. So yeah, from your Hootsuite and Microsoft, I'm curious to see what you say.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. My career went like giant medium, giant.
Yeah.
And Hootsuite is like, it was 1,000 employees globally, I think, when I was there, which in the grand scheme of things relative to the other two is super tiny. I think both, maybe I'll do Deloitte versus Hootsuite just because I was younger at Deloitte. I feel like currently where I am with Microsoft, it was a little easier. But I think starting my career in a big company for me was really useful because there was a lot of knowledge and guidance around me, and there was a lot of like frameworks and like, you know, tracks that I like had to ride on. And what I really had to focus on was to do the things that I was asked to do really well. And then it was on me to kind of try to absorb, like, what is my manager asking me to do, and why are they asking me to do that, and how does that serve the client purpose? And so for me, it was like a really valuable experience to be at a large company at the beginning. It's also the only path that I know, so I don't really know what it would have been like otherwise.
Yeah.
The smaller company experience, which I talked about a little bit, I think taught me a whole different skill set, which I think to an extent, and maybe it's because that's a skill set I've had to put more effort into learning, it feels more valuable to me, which is the skill set of just like doing things or like identifying things, creating your own work. And, you know, to be really transparent, that's the feedback that I still get from my manager as I go into more senior positions, is like, you have to like dedicate time and energy to thinking about, what can I do next? What do I see as an opportunity? Where do I want to take this? Where do I want to take this project, this company, this whatever? And so I think there's value in both of them. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I've worked with people who started in either. From my experience, I think the last thing I'll say is coming into Microsoft and basically learning a whole new technical skill set this late in the game, not this late, I'm still young, but this later in the game. I think it would have been easier for me to do that at Microsoft in the beginning. So if I'm thinking like about a technical skill set that it depends like how strong you feel technically. I think you feel very strong technically, I would maybe start with something smaller personally. If I want to like learn something from scratch, which is where I was with consulting, I was really glad to do that in like a very safe, protected, large company environment.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really good insight. Thank you, Adam. Okay, I'm gonna Oceana, you're next, but I'm gonna read one of the questions that was in the chat and I'll come back to you. So Grace asked, what's the most valuable university experience you had that helped your transition out of university?
Oh, that's such a good question.
The adjacent possibilities talk. I'm kidding. I know it's the title of the event.
Oh, I think there's two of them, and I've touched on both of them. I was trying to think of something else, but I'm now thinking like, if there was something else that was that important, I would have put it in the slides. It was definitely the talk on adjacent possibilities was really important for me. And then that random UBC Consulting Club presentation that I went to. And I think that ties into like a broader theme for me, which is that I just went to things, like I just did things. You know, I didn't really know, I skipped over a whole bunch, but those 4 years at UBC, I like did events, I did like student government stuff. I was in UBC a cappella for 2 years, and like, I just did a whole bunch of things. And I think some of those experiences, even the like really small roles that I did in different like clubs and stuff, helped me, because one of the exercises I did when I was thinking about consulting and adjacent possibilities in that time in my life is I sat down through my resume at the time, all these like volunteer positions I'd done, and even I worked as a tutor. And I literally wrote down with each of them, what did I enjoy about this? And when I sat down and did that, I was like, okay, there's like a theme here. Like, it's about all the things that I've been talking about for the last hour, like the problem solving, strategic thinking, and big picture thinking. Like, I chose those jobs for a reason, and the ones that I enjoyed for a reason. So yeah.
Okay. And, you know, it always comes back, whatever you want to call this, networking is another way to look at this, but it kind of comes back to this conversation of creating those contacts and community, friends, whatever you want to call that. It's by doing things and going to things. It's a theme we keep coming back to when we do these events. So perfect. Great. Thank you for the question. Oceana, if you want to go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, Thank you. Thanks for taking the time too. My question is, you mentioned about learning how to be a self-starter and exercising that muscle. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit more how you exercise that muscle, because I think in school, they really give the instructions like, okay, study this, practice tests, boom, right? Then you enter the real world, you're like, oh, okay, I'm a little lost. So love
Yeah.
insight on that. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, I won't lie, it was very challenging for me in the beginning. But I was lucky that like when I moved to Hootsuite and I needed to start exercising that muscle, my manager at the time who hired me was someone that I'd worked with at Deloitte before and was also somewhat of a personal friend. And so I just had an honest conversation. Like I just said, I'm having a challenge with this. Like I'm so used to being told what to do. And when I was at Deloitte, the fact that I even spoke up and disagreed was like a big deal, not in a bad way, but managers would be like, oh, like you have an opinion, because we were the junior people. You made the slides that you were asked to make and then you like shipped them off. And so I expressed that I was, struggling with that. And I asked for help, like from her on how to do that. To this day, it's still like a muscle that I have to actively think about. And part of that is like actually giving it time. Like so many of these things, it's similar to what I said about the checking in, is like in my week, I have time where I like sit down, think about where my work is going, where my team's work is going, where the company's going, where the space is going, especially as someone who's in strategy, to say like, what should I be doing? What can I be doing better? Where are there opportunities? Where are the challenges? So setting aside the time, and then also like reflecting back and thinking, where were the times that I saw myself do that? And why did I do that? What information was presented to me that like told me that I needed to do something different in my work, and try to like recreate those. So yeah, I think it's like a learn by practice thing, but I think there's also something to be said around just like asking for help from people who do the thing that you're trying to do really well. And I was lucky to have those people around. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. Nikki, I'm going to go to the chat and then I'll come to you after for your question. I see your hand. So Andrea sent a question. So Andrea mentioned, it's a long question. I'll try to summarize. I think it's a chicken and egg problem when it comes to that you want a career change and whether you were given an opportunity by an employer to change it. Do you think you were given a bit more opportunity to try than you deserve, or you actually fought very hard to be given that opportunity? Yeah. There's a follow-up from Andrea, but I'll just let you go with this first.
Just to be clear, so the question is like,
I guess maybe rephrase this, and Andrea, you can send a message if you like, or jump on and ask, but maybe how do you fight to get those opportunities to change your career as you're coming out of school? So I think that's kind of what we're getting at with the question.
Yeah, I mean, I've done, as you can tell, like quite a few changes. I think coming out of university, I really was reliant on someone giving me a chance, right? Like that's the honest truth of it. And I tried really hard to get that job and worked really hard, but I was also lucky. Like it just so happened that Deloitte was hiring for a healthcare consulting person. And I had a degree in microbiology, I had a minor in commerce, and all this experience doing quote unquote strategy stuff. And so I think that first job, I was very much so reliant on someone else to give me a chance, put my best foot forward, best resume I could, had a bunch of people review it, etc. I think after that, I discovered the power of like kind of creating those opportunities for yourself. So even at Deloitte, you're in these like service line teams, and I was in the healthcare team. And I loved the work that I was doing, but it was all public sector healthcare work in BC. And I was like, I'm seeing all this other work that's happening and I'm still interested in it, because the real reason I joined this was for the strategy consulting part of it. And that's where there's stuff that's on us to do, right? So like I would reach out to people who worked in things that I was interested in, or if they were doing an internal talk at the company, I'd go and attend it and express my interest. I'd let them know that I was interested in the work. The first pivot I did was I started doing these user experience projects, and the manager was sitting next to me and he was working on a proposal. And I was like, if you like need help, like I'm working on client stuff right now, but afterwards I can help with the proposal. And so I helped him write the proposal for it. expressed that I'd be interested. And then when we won the work, I ended up doing that project. And I went to my own bosses and I said, I really want to do this. I want to try something new. And so that was where like the networking thing, that was someone who felt comfortable with me because we'd worked on some extracurricular stuff at the company before. I gave them of my time and of my work. And that's how I started to do projects outside of that, similarly with other projects. And then the last major shift, like into more of the data world, I was kind of pulled into it, to be honest. Like that was the sliding into the LinkedIn DMs. But I think even within Hootsuite, between the two roles, I got the second role because I did a bunch of extra work in my former role with that person, with that VP. I was like, I'm really interested in this. If you need help, these are the skills that I have that I can use to help you. And then I like entered into that orbit. So there's definitely a push and pull. Like every career, there's going to be points in time when people give you a chance that, take a risk on you. And that's happened for me when I joined consulting, when I joined Microsoft. But I also think there's like a drive on our end to like create those opportunities, express interest, build relationships, and build genuine relationships before asking for the career move, right? Like I think that's the part that's really helped me.
Perfect. Thank you. And Andrea, hopefully that answered your question. Nikki, I know you had your question. Your hand is gone. Raise your hand again if you want to jump in. I think you were next. Okay, there you go. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for telling us your journey and your story. I find it so relatable, and I'm sure that most people here find it relatable as well. So it's really refreshing to hear. You did mention coming from a science background and having a commerce minor. So this is something I've been really interested about, but just because I'm so late in my degree, I don't know how willing I am to extend my degree just to get the minor. So I was wondering how like applicable or useful did you find that minor into getting where you are now, or even the first job that you got graduating out of school? And if you thought, I mean, obviously I'm not in commerce, so I wouldn't have much exposure to strategy and such, but was studying that what helps you realize you were into that, or was it purely going to that club?
I think I can't remember the chronology of it right now, because it was a few years ago, but I think, no, I'm very sure. I applied for the commerce minor before any of that. And I think that was another signal for me that there was like an interest there. I was just like, it felt like it would be interesting. I knew that I could do it within the time that I needed to finish my degree in. And so I had made that decision fairly early. And by the time the consulting club thing happened, I was already in my minor, which was, I think, really helpful and useful for me. I was coming into like my science degree without a lot of like technical business knowledge, I think. So like I did like economics in high school or whatever, but my minor is what taught me like how to read a financial statement, how to understand financial statements, how to calculate certain things. Especially specifically, I'd say like accounting and finance wise, I went from like zero to like somewhat of a foundation, which has helped me here and there, to be honest. Like I think I could have managed. But one, I think it made me more attractive for the job that I was applying for because it showed that I'd had an interest and had some knowledge versus being like purely a science person trying to go into consulting. The other person who got hired with me at the time was someone who had a degree in pharmacy, but also did an MBA. So like for that specific job, it felt like they were looking for that combo. Because I was doing strategy work is not extremely technical. Like no one does a 4-year strategy degree because you're not learning specific equations or financial models or things like that. There's soft skills that you need to be really good at. And I developed those while I was working. So I would say it depends on how it would, for me, like if you're doing education from a perspective of your career, then there needs to be like a clear line on how it would help you either learn something you don't that will be useful when you're actually doing the job, or that it will help you get the job that you want. And so I think if it's like something that's more technical in the business world, it is useful, one. And then two, if you're just like, I don't know this stuff and I really want to know it for what I want to do, which was where I was, then I would also recommend it.
Okay, yeah. I guess just a small follow-up question, if there is time. Just based off of your experience, like coming into science and working with other people in the industry, how common is it to see someone working in that industry with, let's say, like, I guess, like I would consider myself in STEM, but I don't code. I'm not an eng, right? So it's kind of that weird niche where it's almost like biological science.
Yeah.
Do you ever see people like this in the field? And if so, like other than an MBA, what are other things that I could kind of pursue that would show that I'm also like somewhat compatible for the job?
Yeah, for sure. The first question, the answer is absolutely yes. In all three of my companies and all of the roles I've had, I've worked with people with a completely like wide range of degrees. Like one of the data scientists that I respect and go to for questions all the time, who's my peer, has a degree in I think political science, I think, or something like that, and then just built his like a career in data afterwards. In consulting, I work with people with engineering degrees, science degrees, math degrees, art history degrees. Like, I think if the job isn't extremely technical in the way that it requires, like it's not self-engineering, you know, like I think there's a lot of diversity I've seen in terms of educational background. The challenge then becomes what you asked in the second half, which is like, how do you stand out? And I think what has resonated with employers for me in the past is the existence of a story, right? So all of my extracurriculars at UBC had a thread, and I drew that thread for them. Like as I wrote cover letters, and in my interviews, I was like, this is why I did those things and how that ties to this thing that I'm interested in. And so that could be internships, it could be volunteer opportunities, it could be extracurriculars, it could be like even doing like degrees online, not degrees, sorry, like courses online, doing learning modules online. If all of it makes sense in that 1 to 2 pages, that like this is someone who's obviously interested in the thing that we do, I think that is more important in the kinds of work that I've done than like, what is your specific degree? I've done hiring, right? And none of us almost ever talk about the degree, right? It's because we're not in these like I'm not hiring for a neurosurgeon. I'm hiring for someone who understands data and understands product and is smart and wants to like work hard. And if I can see that, and I see that there's a tie to data somewhere, then I'm likely to recommend them.
Okay, yeah, that's really useful. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Nikki. I'll ask one from the chat, and then Stephanie, I'll come to your hand. I see it. How do you, I think Aurelie asked this question, how do you manage to work under pressure? So what are you like as someone who's under pressure? I imagine you're really good under pressure, but I'm gonna just, no.
I'm like, there's a spectrum. I think like the last mile when it's like, I have something that needs to happen, then it's like go mode. And that's more like instinctive. I haven't really worked on that, to be honest. The part that I have like definitely consciously worked on is like that in the middle time frame, when I know that there's this like really big thing that I need to do in 3 weeks, and I can't do everything to get it done right now. Like I have to wait a week for the data to come, and then 2 weeks for this person to meet with this person, and like, am I going to get there in the finish line? That's really stressful for me. The way that I've worked with it is kind of similar to the thesis of this whole presentation, which is like, what are the immediate things that I can do to get to like closer to where I need to get, right? And so like, if there's things that I'm depending on other people for, like I just make sure that I am kind of like offloading my plate of the things that are on me, and like writing them down, going through in order or however I prioritize them, and focusing on what I can do right now to get closer to. And with time, I'm trying to like keep in mind this thought that like, I've done it before, so I can do it again, right? And like, even in school with like finals every year, like semester, I remember thinking times, I'm like, okay, I passed last semester. Like, I know it feels like I'm going to fail all these exams, but if I've done it before, like I can do it again.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We're coming up to time, but there's a few questions in the chat, and Stephanie. So Hatim, are you okay if we go a few minutes longer? Is that okay with you? Perfect. Stephanie, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. And I'll try to keep it short because I know we're short on time. But first of all, thank you so much for your talk. It really spoke to me, especially because I'm about to enter a career that's completely different from my degree too. And my question is, do you have, like, especially in the professional environment, especially as you enter the data world, do you have any advice on how to kind of balance, like, if you're in a situation where you know you don't have as much technical know-how as maybe the people you're managing, how do you kind of deal with that, like when you're given a task, but still kind of express like your interest and your, I guess, initiative? That makes sense.
Yeah. So just to rephrase, you're kind of asking like, how to navigate being in a role that requires a technical skill that you might not have a lot of. Yeah, I think it kind of ties to one of my answers before. I was very upfront, like from the interview process. I was very clear that like where my skill level was. And I think I felt comfortable with that because, you know, they were the ones who were coming to me and I was like, I'm willing to have this conversation, but this is where my benchmark is. Which was really helpful because then when I joined, they made sure to put like support structures around me. And then it was on me to learn how to ask for help, especially coming from like a role, maybe two roles where like I felt very in control, you know, especially my last year at Hootsuite. It was like I showed up to work every day. I knew what I needed to get done. It was just about executing it, which is a little bit of why I left. I wanted more of that challenge. And I had to like retrain myself to be like, you're always learning. You're always going to have to ask for help. And so to this day, like I write my queries and I send them off to someone in my team to like double check them, or I'll ask people for like a 5-minute call to read through what I'm writing or like to read through the query that I'm writing, and vice versa, right? For them on like some of the skills that I've gained in consulting. So I think it's being open and honest, being willing to ask for help, which is a lot harder than it sounds when you're in a professional setting. And then some of it is like, it just took me extra time in the beginning, right? Like I knew that a query that would take me like an hour to write, my teammate would write in 10. But at some point, it was like, I can't just keep asking them to write it. Like I have to write it myself. And so when I first joined Microsoft in the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, everything else I'm doing in life can keep going and I'm going to start this new job. And within a few weeks, I was like, I actually have to like remove non-work related things from my calendar because I'm spending more time at work because I need to learn something. So it's definitely difficult. I think those are like a few tips, but I think it's also important to evaluate again, like, is there enough that you or I or whoever feels like they can do really well to compensate for that, right? Both, not just to the company, but internally, so that my anxiety is not at 1,000,000. Like I need to know that there's something, some part of it that I can lean on really well. And for me personally, if the whole job is just in that stress bucket, then I'm not taking it for me, like, because that doesn't constitute like a healthy work environment for me.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Thanks for your question. Okay, there's a bunch in the chat. I'm going to run through this quickly so we can get through them, all of them.
Yes,
we'll do rapid fire as much as possible. Samir asked, just curious, what technical projects do you work on currently? What programming languages do you use? Are you in data engineering or data mining or something else entirely?
Sounds a good question. My technical title is as a data scientist. I think I'm more on the analysis side. The technical projects I'm working on is our team is launching a new product. So I work with the engineers to, I don't want to use like hyper technical language, but basically to like if you're on a website and you click a button, the company that runs that website gets a signal that says user X has clicked this button. And on our side, we have to like codify that and organize it in pretty tables that we can then analyze. And so I work with engineers to do that. Once the project launches, then I'm analyzing usage and things that are happening in the product to find opportunities for us to like better serve our customers. So I'm doing a lot of data analysis. I'm doing a lot of market sizing and like forward-looking data analysis. And that's, yeah. And then the programming language, I use SQL, which is specific to data analysis and specific to analyzing large data sets.
And you mentioned you're just learning, or you've just learned the language, programming language, right? It wasn't something that you've done in the past.
Yeah, day one of the job at Microsoft was I just learned by doing it. Yeah.
It's good stuff. On the job learning is always good.
Yeah, not stressful at all.
No. Okay, next question. What do you recommend for a student approaching graduation and they only realized recently that they want to join consulting? could you maybe talk about the case interview?
For sure. So on the first question, it's tough, I'll be honest, because a lot of people have had that goal for a really long time and build a resume for years. Sorry about that. Build a resume for years that like aligns to it. I think it goes back to what I said about like the story of what your application is going to be and how you can enhance that. So if it's specifically consulting, like, can you do roles, whether you're like, if you're still in university with different clubs or things, if you're not at university, volunteering, there's a lot of organizations that look for volunteers to coordinate things that are about planning, that are about organizing, that are about building strategy for things, whether that's a marketing strategy or whatever it is. I'm going to try to turn that off while I talk. But I think that that's probably like the best case scenario. And like, without really knowing the specific details, I can't really give you more details than that, but I'm happy to connect offline. And there's a second part of that question that I wanted to answer.
Case interview, yeah.
Yeah, that's a longer answer as well, but I think there's a lot of resources online, different questions. The biggest tips would be like talking out loud about what you're doing in the interview. So like saying, I am going 2 times 3 because that's the number of products times the price, like talking through it out loud. You don't have to have the right answer. You just have to have sound logic as you go. And yeah, practice as many like practice case interviews as you can do.
Okay, perfect. I think we're in the last 2 questions here. Someone asked you about the change management certificate that you have on your LinkedIn. Yeah. They're interested in joining consulting. Would this certificate or these types of certificates help a fresh grad?
I think so. I think the knowledge itself is really useful for consulting, 1. And then 2, to my earlier point, it shows that you have like a genuine interest and you're not just, you know, I think what will turn people off, especially from fresh grads, if you don't have the relevant experience, is if you like, it feels like you're just like, oh, I'll just throw the same resume to someone, like, I'll just throw this resume to all these different jobs. You can have, it's okay if you don't have the relevant experience. I didn't, but there was a story. There was like a reason why I did all of those things. And I tried to tie it into the work that I was trying to do. So in my opinion, yes.
Okay. And then one last one from someone in the chat. They're asking, and this might be a tough one, asking about asking for references and referrals for places that you work. We all know it might be a tough conversation when you're switching jobs. So what has the process been like for you? Any suggestions on how to ask for a referral or a reference?
Oh, like asking for a reference from someone from a current job when you're trying to move jobs?
Yeah.
I've had to do that only once, I think, when I was going to Hootsuite. And this will tie to something that I said earlier, which is it's about relationships. So when I was working, and genuine relationships, and like we didn't have a chance to really talk about this, but I had worked with so many different people in those years because it's all project based, and you know, I wasn't networking necessarily, but these are people I was spending my time with. So you build, if you're genuine about building relationships, connections with those people, they care about your success and your well-being. So I was able to even tell the partner of my, like the person who ran our entire department, who has a stake in the company, that I was considering leaving before I'd even signed the offer. I sat down with him and said, I have an offer and I'm really considering it. What do you think? So I probably could have asked him for a referral. I didn't at the time, but the managers that I was working with, I told them, I was like, I'm seriously considering it. This is why I think it's best for me. Can you write my referral? And they both, maybe not happily, but they like wrote me great referrals. And I think that's the power of, for me, it's about genuine connection over networking, because people are then invested in your personal success and happiness more so than like how inconvenient that will be for them. And so that's a long-term thing. That's kind of has to start way before you're in that point where you're trying to leave. But I'd say if you're already in that point, and find the person you trust the most and you think is the most invested in your success, and have an honest conversation. You know, at both times that I left, I let people know that I was leaving before I pulled the plug.
Great advice. Thank you everybody for all your questions. I usually ask this as the last question before ending. So Hatim, what is the most important takeaway that you would like the audience to leave with today?
What is the most important takeaway? That's hard. I wish I could ask everyone what their most important takeaway was, but I would say the most important takeaway for me is I'll make it in two halves. One is like to trust your gut, and two is to like contextualize your career within your life. I think for me, that's really important. And I know that when you're starting your career, it feels like your career is everything. And it's like, it's the most important thing that you can do. But I think, you know, contextualizing that within your life and making sure that the decision-making framework when you're evaluating those adjacent possibilities includes everything else, right? There's a lot of personal things that went into those, you know, decisions that I didn't have the time to go through. But, you know, I asked myself, do I want more responsibility? Do I want less responsibility? Do I want to manage people? Do I only want to manage my own career? So yeah, trust your gut and like think of yourself as a whole person when you're making those decisions.
Okay, and on that positive note, we'll end the questions. Hatim, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for your questions. We're going to throw in a slide with a QR code and a link just for you to give us some feedback. Let us know what you thought of the event. It really helps us organizing future events. We ask you who you want to hear from, etc. So please take a moment to go through this link. And also, before we end this, Hatim, where can we find your music? Where are you playing live anywhere? We're on spot. Put a little plug out if you like.
That's right. Yeah, you can find my music anywhere at it's just Hatim, my first name, and you'll see my face. And yeah, I'll update on wherever you find me on upcoming shows. But before we go, I just want to say thank you so much, Amir, for having me. Thank you everyone else for coming and for your questions. I hope it was useful. And if you have any more questions, you can find me on LinkedIn, just my name, Hatim Hanafi, and let me know that you, because we get a lot of messages, but let me know that you attended this, and I'll be happy to answer any more questions that you have via chat there.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy, if you're in Vancouver, enjoy the sunshine the rest of the evening, and have a wonderful rest of the spring. Okay, take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.